very blessed, but he was so magical. And I did not realize at the time, because in '53, when that happened, you didn't have access to old movies. Like you can watch Rio Bravo basically anytime you want to see it by the push of a button. But in those days, you couldn't look at old movies until they were re-released.
At 93 years old, Angie Dickinson has finally broken her silence about the man she calls the love of her life. For decades, Hollywood whispered about the actress and her connection to one of the most powerful men in entertainment. Now, after all these years, she's ready to tell the whole story, and what she reveals will change everything you thought you knew about her life, her marriages, and the choices she made that stunned the world. Angie Dickinson became a household name in 1959 when she starred opposite John Wayne in Rio Bravo. Her portrayal of Feathers, the tough saloon girl with a heart of gold, launched her into Hollywood's elite circle. She had the looks, the talent, and the charisma that made her one of the most sought-after actresses of the 1960s. But behind the glamorous red carpet appearances and magazine covers, Angie was living a double life that would remain hidden for over 60 years. In 1960, she landed a role that would change her life forever. Ocean's 11 brought together Hollywood's most legendary names, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and the rest of the Rat Pack.
It's impossible to describe, except that he was, I guess, the most exciting man I've ever been with, or near.
It was on this set that Angie and Frank first connected. The chemistry between them was undeniable, electric even. Cast and crew members noticed how Frank's eyes followed her across the room, how he made sure she was always included in the group's legendary late-night gatherings. But what started as on-set flirtation quickly became something far more complicated. Frank Sinatra was already a legend by this point. His voice had captivated millions, his connections ran deep through Hollywood and beyond, and his reputation with women was well established. He'd been married multiple times, most famously to Ava Gardner, in a relationship that had been as passionate as it was volatile. When that marriage ended, Frank wasn't looking to settle down again anytime soon. But Angie was different. She had an independence about her, a strength that matched his own intensity. She wasn't just another starlet hoping to ride his coattails to fame. She was already a star in her own right. Their affair began quietly at first. In an industry where everyone knew everyone else's business, Frank and Angie somehow managed to keep their relationship mostly under wraps. They would meet at Frank's home in Palm Springs, at exclusive restaurants where the owners knew to give them privacy, and at the homes of trusted friends. The secrecy added to the intensity. Here were two of Hollywood's biggest stars sneaking around like teenagers because neither wanted the media circus that would inevitably follow if their relationship became public knowledge. By 1964, things had gotten serious, really serious. Angie later revealed that they came very close to getting married that year. She was ready. She loved Frank with an intensity she'd never experienced before or since. But Frank had doubts. He'd been down the marriage road before, and it had never ended well. The pressure of maintaining a public relationship, the constant scrutiny, the way marriage seemed to take the magic out of romance for him, all of it made him hesitate. When he expressed his concerns to Angie, she understood. She even told him she didn't blame him, that she wouldn't wish the complications of marriage on anyone either. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. So they continued their on and off relationship. Sometimes they were together, sometimes they weren't. Frank would date other women, Angie would see other men, but they always seemed to come back to each other. It was a pattern that would continue for 20 years, an impossibly long time to maintain any kind of relationship, especially one without the security of commitment. Friends who knew them both said that Angie accepted this arrangement because she'd rather have Frank in her life in some capacity than not have him at all. But that acceptance came at a cost. In 1965, just a year after almost marrying Frank, Angie married someone else entirely, Burt Bacharach, the legendary composer behind countless hits. Seemed like the perfect match. He was talented, successful, and willing to make the commitment that Frank wouldn't. But years later, in interviews, Angie would drop hints that suggested this marriage was built on something less than true love. She married Burt, but her heart still belonged to Frank. It was a compromise, a decision to build a life with someone reliable, even if he wasn't the one who made her heart race. The marriage to Bert lasted 16 years, but it was complicated from the start. They had a daughter, Nikki, who was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, something that put enormous strain on their relationship. Bert threw himself into his music, touring constantly, while Angie focused on her career in raising Nikki. In the mid-1970s, they separated for 5 years, though they never officially divorced during that time. During the separation, both Angie and Bert saw other people, and according to those close to her, Angie reconnected with Frank during this period. Their decades-long affair was still ongoing, still pulling her back no matter how hard she tried to move on. But Frank wasn't the only powerful man whose name became linked with Angie's. For years, rumors swirled about a possible affair with President JFK. The speculation made sense on the surface. Angie moved in the same circles as JFK. She knew members of the Rat Pack who were close friends with the president. She was exactly the type of beautiful, intelligent woman that Kennedy was known to pursue. The rumors persisted for decades, whispered about in Hollywood gossip columns and hinted at in books about Kennedy's personal life. Some claimed she was one of many actresses who visited the White House for private encounters. Others suggested the affair was more serious, that Kennedy had genuine feelings for her that went beyond his usual dalliances. Angie has consistently and firmly denied these rumors every single time she's been asked. In interviews, she's been direct. There was no affair with JFK. There weren't even any advances made. She stated clearly that there was no reason anyone should think she was seeing him because she wasn't. But the rumors never completely died. Some people believe her denials. Others think she's protecting Kennedy's legacy or her own reputation, or simply maintaining the discretion that was expected of women in her position during that era. The truth may never be fully known, but what is certain is that the speculation added another layer of intrigue to Angie's already fascinating personal life. After finally divorcing Bert in 1981, Angie remained single for a while, focusing on her groundbreaking role in Policewoman, the television series that made her a household name and earned her a Golden Globe. But she didn't stop dating. Throughout the 1980s, she was linked to several high-profile men. Johnny Carson, the legendary Tonight Show host, was one of her boyfriends. Glenn Ford, the classic film star, was another. And in the 1990s, she dated Larry King, the famous CNN interviewer. Each relationship brought something different to her life, but none of them could match what she'd had with Frank. It wasn't until 2023, when Angie was in her early 90s, that she finally went public with the full truth. In an interview, she openly acknowledged the 20-year affair with Frank Sinatra. She called him the love of her life. She described him as one of the most charismatic men who ever lived. After decades of keeping this relationship relatively private, of downplaying their connection or simply not discussing it at all, Angie decided it was time to tell the truth. And her words carried the weight of someone who had lived with the secret for so long, who had made peace with the choices she'd made, and the love she'd never fully gotten to experience the way she'd wanted. Why did she wait so long to speak openly about Frank? Perhaps it was respect for Bert and her daughter while they were still living. Perhaps she wanted to protect Frank's legacy while he was alive, since he passed away in 1998. Or maybe, after all these years, she simply reached a point where keeping the secret no longer mattered. She'd lived her life, made her choices, and now, in her 90s, she wanted the truth to be known, not for scandal or attention, but simply because it was the truth, and she was tired of letting others control the narrative of her own love life. The revelation raised interesting questions about Angie's marriage to Bert. If Frank was always the love of her life, why marry someone else? The answer is complicated, as these things always are. Frank couldn't give her the commitment she wanted. He was afraid of marriage, afraid of the way it had failed him before, afraid of losing the freedom he'd fought so hard to maintain. Angie wanted stability, wanted a family, wanted something she could build on. Bert offered that, even if he couldn't offer the passion she'd felt with Frank. It was a practical choice, one that many women of her generation made when faced with similar circumstances. Love the one who won't commit, or marry the one who will. Angie chose the latter, even though her heart never fully let go of the former. Looking back on her life now, Angie doesn't seem to have regrets exactly, but there's a wistfulness when she talks about Frank. She understands why things couldn't work out between them the way she'd hoped. She recognizes that the intensity of their connection might have burned out if they had actually tried to build a conventional life together. The on and off nature of their relationship, as painful as it sometimes was, might have been the only way it could have lasted as long as it did. But that doesn't mean she doesn't wonder what might have been if Frank had been willing to take that leap with her in 1964, if they'd actually gone through with the wedding, if they had tried to make it work. Frank Sinatra's legacy is massive. He's remembered as one of the greatest singers of all time, a cultural icon whose influence extended far beyond music into film, politics, and American culture itself. But he's also remembered for his complicated personal life, his multiple marriages, his numerous affairs, and his reputation as a man who could or wouldn't settle down. Angie's revelation adds another dimension to that legacy. It shows that among all those relationships, there was one woman who held a special place. One woman he kept coming back to for 20 years. One woman who might have been the one if circumstances had been different. For Angie, speaking the truth about Frank seems to have brought a sense of peace. She's not bitter about the marriage that never happened. She's not angry about the years she spent loving someone who couldn't fully commit. Instead, she seems grateful for the connection they shared, for the love that sustained them both through the ups and downs of their complicated lives. At 93, she's lived long enough to understand that love doesn't always look the way we think it should, that sometimes the greatest loves in our lives are the ones that don't follow conventional paths. The story of Angie Dickinson and Frank Sinatra is one of Hollywood's great untold romances. It lasted 2 decades, survived marriages to other people, and remains strong enough that Angie still calls him the love of her life more than 25 years after his passing. It's a story about the choices we make between passion and stability, between following our hearts and building practical lives. It's about the complicated nature of love and commitment, and how sometimes the two don't go hand in hand the way we wish they would. Angie Dickinson's legacy extends far beyond this one relationship, of course. She was a groundbreaking actress who paved the way for women in television with Policewoman. She had a career that spanned 7 decades. She survived personal tragedies, including the loss of her daughter, Nikki. She remained relevant and respected in an industry notorious for discarding older actresses. But her love for Frank Sinatra, kept quiet for so many years and finally revealed in her 90s, adds a deeply human element to her story. It reminds us that even the most glamorous, successful people struggle with matters of the heart, that fame and fortune don't make love any simpler, and that sometimes the greatest love stories in our lives are the ones that never quite got their Hollywood ending.